Welcome back, everybody. So this first phase is over. The 8 minutes are up, and now my finger is set in that alginate. I'm going to focus on the table from here on out, or at least for this part of the video, right up until we get to the point where we want to do some plaster casting. Now what you should know is that there's a little bit of sponginess and flexibility to the surface of the alginate. As it sets up, you'll feel it start to firm up around your finger. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll put a little dab of alginate on my finger and track the setting. Another thing I can do is back here on the table, you can see this is my chopsticks. I just let them sit with a little bit of residual alginate on them, and now I can just peel them off the surface, and you can see the alginate has set around the chopsticks. So I know it's set. I know it's in good shape. All I have to do at this point is just wiggle my finger around a little bit so I can kind of loosen it, and then slowly pull my finger out. Now that leaves a hole like that. You can see there's some air bubbles that rose to the top of the alginate. That's good. You don't want them to sort of like remain down in the liquid. You want them to rise. Sometimes while it's setting, and I didn't mention this before, I will kind of tap the cup a little bit to try and push the bubbles up, to try and encourage them to rise. So there we go. We have our first mold made and ready to go. But before we start thinking about casting it, which we should do pretty quickly, an alginate mold dries out fast, so it's a good idea to cast it shortly after you've made the mold. I would not want to leave this more than a couple of hours. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just talk a little bit about some of the other things you should know about making a mold and successful casting. So I've just brought a couple of other objects to the table. One of them, I just happen to have this antler laying over on my work surface. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about what happens if you actually take an object like this and dip it down into your alginate. If you look closely at this, you'll see it's got this flared edge all the way around the outside. Now what's going to happen if I try to do the same thing as I just did with my finger, where I pull my finger out? If I do this, if I put this in, let the alginate set, and then pull it out, that flared edge is going to tear the alginate as it pulls out. The alginate's not super tough, and it's not flexible to bounce back after that kind of an extraction. So understand, I can't stick something like this shape right here with this kind of an edge. I can't stick something like that in here and expect to be able to pull it back out without tearing my alginate. So I have to have a different strategy if that's what I'm going to do. Now, a couple things I could consider. I could consider laying it only halfway into the alginate, so that when it pulls out, there are fewer little areas that are what we call undercut. So in other words, what we call these little sides, if you submerge them down in the alginate, they lock in, and they're actually sort of undercutting the mold. So we would call that an undercut. We don't want to have undercuts. If I were to take something, whoa, goodness, that sounds like crazy. If I were to take an object like this, which was another object I was considering just for fun, as a sample to try and cast, and I were to submerge this, let's see if I can get that right, submerge this in my alginate, what's going to happen? The alginate is going to flow. It's going to flow into this central area. It's going to harden, and then when I try to pull this object out, it's just going to tear the alginate, and it's probably going to take a little plug of alginate with it on the way. So I'm not going to get a good accurate cast of this thing if I'm just trying to insert it and then pull it back out. So I have to have a slightly different kind of strategy for something like this. So something we can consider here, again, is one, we could take an object like this and we could just in the wet alginate. Just press it in until it comes to the very top edge of this piece. And then we hold it there. Perhaps what we do is we take a stick like this and maybe we hot glue it so that we can hold it in place without it falling down inside. Or maybe we can hot glue it on an edge like this, put it all the way down in, and then when we pull our mold out, we can tear it in half and then put it back together and put it back in the cup for actual casting. We're going to try that. We're going to make a little experiment of that. So that's our plan. That's what's coming next. We're gonna give that a try. But in this case, instead of hot gluing something to the tip, I'm just going to go ahead and hold it by that little tip. I'm going to submerge it and just hold it there. I don't have a hot glue gun set up and ready to go. So we're going to repeat the steps, and this time it's going to be a little easier for you to see because of the way I have the camera situated. I have my cups here, and what we're going to do is we're going to start by casting this object. So first, and I don't need to make it too deep. I know it's going to fit in my cup. There's going to be some space around it. But what I'm also going to want to bear in mind is the deeper I get, the narrower this cup is. And this object is pretty wide. I want a little bit of area on all sides. I can still get pretty close to ½ an inch on all sides, and I'm just going to assume that's okay. I told you before, ideally, you have 1 inch on all sides, but I think since we're going to put the mold back in the cup, that's going to be a substantial amount. So I'm going to go ahead, fill my cup with alginate and give it a little shake so it settles. There's my alginate. I'll take my second cup and I'm going to go ahead and estimate a similar level of water. Okay, I might even put just a tiny bit more alginate in there, just given what I just filled up in terms of water. So hopefully I have a pretty similar, or I do have a really similar level of water and alginate. The next thing is to mix it. And then what I'm going to do really quick is I'm just going to extract my chopsticks from their standing alginate mold. And you can see when I roll that out, it actually memorized some of the details of the chopstick. So now I have my chopsticks free. I'm just going to clean them of any little chunks, little random pieces of alginate, get it off of there, so that when I mix, I'm not leaving little weird random chunks behind. I'm going to go ahead, and as I did before, I'm going to set my phone to 8 minutes. And you can see it's already set. And then I'm going to start my mixing. I'll put my phone back here so you can see me hit the timer. Okay, I'm going to start my mixing, and you can kind of see it happen this time. I'll put it right in the plane of focus. There we go. So here we go. I'm going to start by just adding a little bit of the water and just starting to kind of get the alginate wet. You can see it's a little sloppy. I'm okay with that. I can clean this surface when I'm done. You know, having a slightly bigger object to kind of mix your alginate in is preferable, but not crucial. I wouldn't want to try to mix much more than this. I think it would become really inconvenient and difficult. And like I said, this has to happen with some quickness. So we want to get it done pretty fast. So now I have all my water. I'm going to go ahead. Well, let's make sure we're in. There we go. I'm going to go ahead, get it mixed in. Great. Now I can kind of speed it up. I'm going for nice, smooth consistency. I don't want it to have any clumps. I want to make sure I'm catching the edges and pulling any remaining powder up. All right. If you're doing this for a larger object, you can actually use a drill and a paddle. You can actually mix it with an electric drill, and that makes this process quite fast and efficient. Now, I'm getting to the point where this is becoming really good and smooth. So that looks fantastic. Right about where I want it. Great. I'll go ahead, I'll take these out, lay them on the side, and then I'm just going to go ahead and carefully submerge my object All right. Now, alginate will effectively release from most things. I'm going to push it most of the way down in and then pull it back up just a little. Now, next thing, I'm going to want to come over here, unlock my phone, and start my timer. And so it's going to take 8 minutes for that to set up. So there's a second round. Once this is all set up, we're going to come back and we're going to take a look at it and see what it takes to extract that object and try to keep our alginate mold intact enough that we can make a reasonable copy without destroying the mold. So we'll be back shortly.